Welcome to EDM 511. Today I want to talk to you about critical theory. The course reading, Rethinking the Adolescent and Adolescent Literature, it advocates for this youth lens. And that's really important because it's advocating for a certain sort of approach to or analysis of the literature. And I wanted to situate that into a conversation a little bit so that you can kind of understand how that fits. So what we're going to look at today, we're going to talk a little bit about literary theory. Which is really a set of philosophies on how to analyze or approach literature. And then we're going to explain how critical theories, which is the youth lens would be one of those critical theories, how those are connected to the philosophy of Karl Marx. And then I'm going to have you practice, I'm going to have you analyze an animated short on your own. When I teach literary theory to high school students, when I had my own high school classroom, I would use the analogy of a camera and its different lenses. So I'm in the woods and I see a beautiful striking tree and I want to take a picture of that tree. Depending on what lens I put onto my camera, my sort of what I notice about that tree and how I perceive that tree in my photograph is going to be very different. The content doesn't change. The tree stays the same, but my understanding of that tree shifts depending on the lens. And that's really what literary theory is all about. Sort of giving you a sense of what to notice as you come to an understanding of a text. So the idea of literary criticism, youth lenses, this is a brand new movement, last 5 years or so. But that doesn't mean that the idea of having a lens, a specific kind of orientation, that's a new idea. Really, the 19th century was sort of the formal schools of literary criticism, where we kind of get to what we think of today as, analysis and understanding of text. So in the 19th century, they looked at what we call the romantic literary criticism, which really wanted to look at what are the things that influences a writer. So their life story, the people that they've read and were influenced by, the allusions that they make, what's happening historically, the historical context. That all comes out of the 19th century. So they started to look at things other than just the text itself. This is also where we sort of had this notion that there is a set of books that educated people should read in order to be, part of the club, so to speak. And you can see that notion has remained very, very important and certainly influences a lot of curriculum in the high school levels especially. And so this is where that comes out of. So 19th century, there was this movement, this romantic literary criticism movement that kind of took us away from what was happening on the text. And there are some people that were very uncomfortable with that because really up until then, this was the era when poetry was very structured. And so there was a movement called the formalism that happened slightly after the Romantics where they wanted to go back to looking at the literary form. It attempted to be more scientific where it felt like the Romantic, you can't really objectively quantify how much Shakespeare influenced a writer. But this looked at more like a scientific approach. It would look at things like plot devices, and it would try to explore how that plot device functioned within the work. And so that was, these were these two dueling perspectives that came out of the 19th century. We moved into the 20th century, into the more modern era, and this is where we started to see some of the more, what we would say, the more influential to today's literature and literary theory. New criticism came out of the formalist movement. It was sort of almost a response against the formalist movement, it was kind of like a reiteration of the formalist movement where it really called for just looking at the text itself, just paying very close attention. And you can see new criticism, when we talk about close reading, new criticism really, that's where those terms and sort of that approach came from, and that was really important. And then, but about the same time, we had Marxist literary theories, and that was kind of a balance to new criticism. And Marxist literary theories was looking at how society sort of influences our understanding of literature. And so, again, we have these sort of dual ideas. And so when we moved into the late 20th century, moved into two other really important movements, which were structuralism and post-structuralism. And when you look at structuralism is really kind of comes from or out of the new criticism and the formalism. And so it's really just looking again at language. It's looking at might look at things like meta language, like sonnets in general. How do sonnet the structure of the sonnet? How does that influence the way work is perceived? Things like that. And then post structuralism is really where we talk about this idea that there's no fixed language. It's a very modern idea. So this is really the reader response theory, the idea that people bring their own experiences and use that to bring meaning to a text. That comes out of post-structuralism. So this idea that there's not a fixed meaning. Okay, so we're going to spend some specific time looking at the critical theories, because critical theories are very, very important, and certainly the youth lens is going to come out of that critical theory. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of Karl Marx in case you forgot some of the details about his life. So, oops, sorry, I don't know why I did that. So here we go.
Our annual sale will get you the readiest. Book now for at least 20% off.
Just like in class, right? Okay.
Karl Heinrich Marx, the father of Marxism, was born on May 5th, 1818, in the Kingdom of Prussia, part of the German Confederation.
His grandfathers on both sides came from lines of famous rabbis, but his own father had converted to Protestantism, given the barriers to Jewish involvement in society as full citizens.
In 1835, Marx left home to attend the university, where he became fascinated with the teachings of German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel.
He had a full and exciting life, but was captivated by these big ideas coming from Hegel about what determined the path of a society of human civilization.
Between 1843 and 1845, Karl Marx forged two relationships that changed the course of his life.
One was to his wife, Jenny von Westphalen, who came from the Prussian aristocracy. A happy marriage, 7 children. And the other was his intellectual bonding with Friedrich Engels, who brought to the relationship a set of experiences and knowledge that really opened Marx's eyes to new approaches.
In 1848, Marx and Engels laid out their concept of socialism in their most famous work, the Communist Manifesto. In their writings, they championed the worker and advocated a classless society that dissolved bonds between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie.
The Communist Manifesto is not only Marx maturing from a philosopher and economist into a revolutionary and an activist, it's also remarkably well timed. The ink was barely dry when a wave of revolution swept all over Europe. He was seen as so seditious that he couldn't find a home anywhere in continental Europe, and therefore exiled to London.
In London, Karl took a job as a European correspondent to the New York Tribune.
Writing for the American market, he naturally had to turn his attention to American politics to an extent. The crisis over slavery, the abolitionist movement, and ultimately the Civil War.
Marx went on to write economic and political works, including Das Kapital. In 1864, Marx was elected to the General Council of the International Workingmen's Association, where he fought against capitalism as well as the anarchist wing of the organization.
In his travels in Europe and in the United States, he had an international perspective on things. He had a worldwide view, a very, very wide aperture.
By the early 20th century, Marx's theories became increasingly popular and were adopted by different countries. The Russian Revolution of 1917 ushered in the first communist government, and after World War II, socialism and communism spread to countries throughout Europe, Asia, and Latin America.
I think that communism appealed because it provided such a contrast with the existing economic situation.
Whether he foresaw it or not, his impact on revolutionary movements from Russia to China to Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea has been immense. They all base their legitimacy and their program on Marxism.
Karl Marx died of illness on March 14, 1883, and is buried in Highgate Cemetery in London. On his tombstone is inscribed the final line of the Communist Manifesto: "Workers of all lands unite."
Okay, so that's a little bit about Karl Marx and who he was, just so that you could get a sense of, of the. I'm sure many of you present. Sorry, present. I think it's coming from here. Okay, I'm sure most of you remember him, but Karl Marx, the father of socialism, very much concerned. Very much, it was an economic philosophy, but it had implications. It had social implications, and so what came out of what was really an economic movement was this idea that we can view society from this lens of this philosophical lens, but that the philosophical lens is not just about economics. And so when we talk about critical lenses in literature, there's a subset. There's a number of different types of criticisms that you could look at. You can look at a work, again, thinking about that tree in the forest. I could look at it from a sense of Marxism, feminist, gender, queer theory, race, or post-colonialism. So if I'm looking at that same book, I can look at, a story, and I can look at it from a Marxist lens, which means I'm going to look to see about power imbalance, especially economic power imbalance. If I look at feminist, I might look to see about the portrayal of women as less powerful over men. If I'm looking at gender or queer theory, I might look at how the work portrays heteronormative tendencies and gives power to those who are heteronormative. If I look at race, obviously I'm going to be looking at the issues of racial injustices. And if I look at post-colonialism, I'm going to be looking at how things are unduly influenced by Western culture, by Western ideals, by America and Europe. So when we look at something from a critical lens, whether it is actually Marxist or feminist or race, critical race theory, we want to think about some terms that Marx used when he was thinking about economics, but how they have kind of applications that supersede a discussion of economics. So one of the terms is hegemony, which is the leadership or dominance that one group has over the other. In Marx's case, it was the capitalists over the workers, right? But in queer theory, it might be heterosexuals over people who identify as queer or homosexual. In race, it might be white dominance over blacks, that type of thing. And another term that Marx uses that has an economic meaning, which is capital, which is the source of wealth. So if we're looking at something in Marxist terms, we're actually going to be looking at class. But we could also think of it as cultural capital, such as maleness, whiteness, heterosexuality. So Marxist criticism is not merely a sociology of literature concerned with novels get published and whether they mention the working class. Its aim is to explain the literary work more fully, and this means a sensitive attention to its form, styles, and meanings. But also it means grasping those form, styles, and meanings as a product of a particular history. So what we're going to look at when we're looking at something from a Marxist criticism or from a critical theory is we're going to look at the sociology of society in the work, but how that work kind of either challenges it or replicates it. So what about the form, the style? So for instance, word choice, things like that. All right, so in any of these then, you're really going to be looking at what group is dominant over the others and where is that source of wealth and what is the author saying about that observation, okay? So some things are intentionally challenging social norms, some things are replicating social norms, and when you are looking through a work of literature from this critical lens, you're sort of trying to unearth that. So let's try this, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a very short, well, it's not very short, it's actually pretty cool. It's about the 12-minute animated film. And what I want you to do is, depending on when your birthday is, I'm kind of assigning you here a critical lens. So we're going to watch this film. If your birthday is in January, February, March, or April, I want you to pay attention to the film, and I want you to say, what is the film saying about class and about the notion of social class? And I want you to look for evidence in the film. How do you know that that's what it's saying about social class? If your birthday is in May, June, July, or August, I want you to put on a feminist lens, and I want you to think about what is the film saying about women and their power in society. And I want you to think about how do you know that, okay? And then if your birthday is September, October, November, or December, you're going to be assigned the critical race theory, which means you're going to look to say, what is this short film saying about race and society, and how do you know? So what we're going to do is I'm going to show this short film here. It's about 12 minutes. And what you're going to do is you're going to go on to Leo. And after you're done watching the film, or after you're done watching this lecture, whichever one you want to do, you're going to go on to Leo and you're going to post a thoughtful paragraph response to this question. So, Marxist, feminist, or race question, okay? And then I want you to respond to the post of at least 2 other classmates. Hopefully you'll be able to see how each lens help you to notice different aspects of the film. So again, going back to that idea of the tree and the forest, your perspective, the content doesn't change. The film's the same no matter which lens you have on, but sort of what you pay attention to, that shifts a little bit. Okay, so let's look at this film. Oh, sorry.
Our medical teams provide life-saving care to...
And there will be one in the middle of it.
We're all born of the same matter. However, we're not all born equal. Who will you be? What will you become? Some people are born to be leaders, affecting great change amongst their people. Others are born into mediocrity, living unremarkable lives. But for some, life will be a constant battle, offering 0 opportunities. So how can nothing be something? School was the only place where Zero received attention. He learned important life lessons like his value in society, and that it was forbidden for his denomination to multiply. Sometimes Zero was made to feel like a much larger number. But the children only wanted to remind him that a zero is a zero, no matter which way you face. As Zero grew into an adult, he walked a lonely path. Despite his numerical shortcomings, Zero felt he had something to offer. Zero never allowed bad situations to get him down. He didn't want to be a negative number.
Oh, this is a little. Okay.
Messy writing can cost you
As
a
soon as I
lot.
can, I'll skip the.
Grammarly Business focuses on commas,
All right.
spelling,
Come on. Okay, there you go. Sorry.
It wasn't the first time Zero awoke with a battered and bruised body. But this time was different. For the first time, Zero felt unaware of his lowly number. In the company of his new friend, he felt as important as a 3, or even a 4. But the most wonderful sensation was the feeling of belonging. A lifetime of loneliness faded into the past, along with the notion that their love was forbidden. As the world continued without him, Zero wondered how he could ever continue without his love. The newborn, born with a mark of infinity, the largest and most respected number the people had ever seen. Zero knew that for a nothing, he had created something truly magnificent.
Okay. All right, so that is the short story that I'd like you to spend some time looking at. And response, if you were looking through that short story with a feminist lens, what is it saying about women and the power women have in society? If you were looking at it from a Marxist lens, what is it saying about social class and wealth, and then and as power? And then if you were looking at this from a critical race lens, what can you say about what might this say about race? So I want you to look at that, and I want you to write up a response, and I want you to go to responses by other people in the class, and respond to their posts. Okay. If you want, I'm going to continue on with the lecture. If it's up to you, if you want to stop here, come back to the lecture, or finish up the lecture. I don't have much more to do, but the question becomes, why are we doing this? Well, it's because the critical youth lens is something that I'm going to have you look at for the first reading. We're going to look at this as we're reading our first two readings. I want you to think about, what is this work of literature saying about youth, and about our notion of youth, and about the power that youth have and the role that they have in society. And I want you to think about, how do you know that, the power or lack of power that it has. So earlier last semester, or a couple of weeks ago, I had asked you, did you want the class to read the entire, everybody read the same works, but maybe you pick from a group of titles, or everyone picks their own title. And of course, the class was split 50-50. One person didn't vote, between selecting from everyone has a choice, or selecting what the whole group reads. So I decided that for the first two readings, you're going to have that choice, and then for the second readings number 3 and 4, you're going to do the voting. Okay, so we'll do both. But the first two readings we're going to look at the theme of coming of age. Very popular young adult literature theme, very important young adult literature thing. And what's going to happen then is, for the first reading, you're going to select from a list of contemporary works, and then for the second reading, you're going to look at more of the canon text. You're going to look at more classic texts, and you're going to be able to pick one of the classic texts that's typically taught in the middle school or high school classroom. And so for the first group, you will pick from one of these titles, and feel free to go onto Amazon, do some research, look to see what interests you. But you can look at Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, Looking for Alaska, Eleanor and Park, Wonder, American-Born Chinese, and Brown Girl Dreaming. You may pick any of those text choices, but what you're going to need to be thinking about as you're reading those text choices is, you're going to be looking at it in that youth lens. You're going to be looking at it with that critical youth lens, okay? So here are the things that you're going to need to do this week. If you haven't already done this, I want you to use the video feedback to revise your personal narrative. That's going to be due at the end of this module, so at the end of this week. You're going to add an informal letter to me where we're going to explain to me how you revised it and what prompted that revision, those revision choices. The second thing you're going to do, if you didn't already do this, if you didn't stop the video and you just played it through, I want you to go back and I want you to post on Leo your analysis of the video 0. And then I want you to respond to at least 2 posts by people in the class. And then I want you to go ahead and make your selection for Read 1 and begin reading that. The novel and written response will be due on the 10th of February, okay? All right, thank you very much, and have a good week.